Howland. Welcome to Red, White and Blue. Saturday marks the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency. Some say that this has been the weakest 100 days of any president since the office existed. Others argue that he is making progress but is consistently met with opposition. A few of President Trump's pledges for these first few months included to repeal and replace the Affordable Health Care Act, to propose a constitutional amendment imposing term limits on members of Congress, and to begin removing undocumented immigrants from the United States. So tonight we will ask whether these promises are being kept or broken. Joining us tonight are Jay Iyer, Assistant Professor of Law and Policy at Texas Southern University, and Dr. Brandon Rottinghouse, Professor of Political Science at the University of Houston. And leading our discussion, our hosts, David Jones and Gary Polland.
And of course, it's not 100 days yet, it's 98 or 99, and so, but you could certainly predict, I'm sure, what's going to happen in 100 days. You know I just want to know, to my guests here, who's getting the best out of the headlines as I read today? Tax plans shift trillions to wealthy. Deficit takes backseat to tax cuts, $7 trillion in debt, and the House unlikely to vote on repeal and replace before the 100 days in order to police the president. So who's getting the best out of the headlines, Democrats or Republicans?
I mean, I think nobody really. The problem with the president's first 100 days have been that it's been a lot of stasis. Partly it's because the system is designed to be like slow and sluggish, and partly because there's been this friction within the party. When people are asked if they thought that Donald Trump's 100-day non-event has been his fault or the Republicans' fault or Democrats' fault, mostly people blamed him, but a quarter blame Republicans and only 7% blame Democrats. So there's room there for the president to be able to kind of move those numbers. But the fact that there's this problem, I think, is going to be an issue for him to be able to generate some positive movement.
Well, Jay, do you think part of Trump's problem is that his news coverage is rated as 93% negative?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair statement. I mean, there's no doubt that he's positioned himself kind of contrary to the media. They're really the biggest enemy he has, right? I mean, there's sort of a unified front against him. And so he's relying kind of extensively on kind of producing his own news, producing his own ability to get it out with Twitter. So to David's point earlier about who's winning the battle, I'd kind of say both, because if you look at the headlines, what his message is I want to cut your taxes. The Democrats' message is it's going to blow up the deficit. So I think he's getting what he wants out of it. But for him, ultimately, judging him on a conventional way via how the media interprets him is never going to be a winner for him.
Well, I guess in line with that, Brandon, my question would be this. Have we reached the stage in national American politics and among our Senate and House and President that they're just going to bicker and never get anything done? Because it seems like it's been going on for a long time.
Right. The United States of bickering. Yeah, it's been going on for a long time. Look, polarization has been ever present. It's something that we haven't seen before. But the fact is that you've got this real divergence within the party, within the Republican Party, and that's creating the inability for unified government to work. And that's always been the model, right? So who's winning? Well, I mean, if you're a Democrat, you're probably not that unhappy because things haven't been like as disastrously undone as expected. But it's still the case that there's going to be friction. So can you make 100 days without having a firm, solid piece of legislation? Yeah, presidents do that, right? They do it all the time. Well, only in really extreme circumstances do we see like explosive, really important legislation in the first 100 days. It's a long process.
What if you're a citizen, how is it that you can be happy with a tax plan that is one page, and how is it that you can be happy with a Secretary of State that has 200 positions that have not been filled?
Well, that's the fault of the Democrats in the Senate, Jay, who are slow balling them.
I'm asking them
So when you look at the tax plan, for example, I mean, it's clear you don't have a real tax plan if it's written on the back of a Post-it note.
Why is
it's not a legitimately detailed plan because the governance element of politics is hard, and we know that. But what we do know is that it's sort of a statement of principles, right? It's not what they released was not the actual plan. It was a statement of what they want. We know it's going to go through a process, and it gives you sort of a general guideline of the direction he wants, right? Lowering corporate tax rates, which is something that he campaigned on. It certainly has appeal, I think, to his base. And the challenge for him, though, is moving forward is to try to sort of flesh that out in the process. Again, I think we tend to want to judge him really probably a little too harshly on terms of the details. He sets himself up for a little bit of it because it's unrealistic to do everything that he says he's going to do in 100 days. It's just not realistic. But you know, the parameters of what he's laid out is consistent with what he's told people he wants to do.
Okay, so why is it? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So following up on David's question about the tax plan, David snide remarked that this only benefits the rich. Of course, David forgets that the top 20% pay about 90% of the taxes in America, and you go to the top 1%, they probably pay about 45 or 50. So if you're going to cut taxes, you're cutting taxes for people who pay taxes. But I think what's behind Trump is not the tax reductions, and I want your take on this, Brandon. I think it's to get the economy moving again and get people working, because he talked so much during the campaign about jobs that were being lost. He wanted to get back to America. What's your take?
I think that that's probably like a sellable point for him, and that's something they could have focused on. I think tax reform should have been what they started with. That was your opening pitch. The healthcare debacle, I think, has been a problem, and the fact that we haven't had any kind of resolution, even within the caucus, about what to do about it is going to be something that's going to haunt that and perhaps even keep it as it is. So I think that the president needs to focus on jobs. That was his one big issue, right? He's going to be the greatest jobs-creating president in history. Even if that isn't true, at least you have to be able to go back and claim credit for it credibly, and I don't know that we've seen that yet. So the numbers are sluggish enough that it is, I think, problematic, and it's related to the inability to deliver, right? If you say you're going to reform healthcare and then you don't, markets get spooked. If you say you're going to reform taxes and then you don't, then there's going to be sluggishness in hiring because businesses don't know what to think. So this inefficiency is not just an issue for the kind of academic study of how we think about the first 100 days. It's also the case that markets are going to react to these kinds of things.
But he stuck in his arguments that he made during the campaign. And in order to please his base, you would think that he would be able to say that he has money for the wall, which he won't have. That he.
I thought Mexico was going to pay for the wall.
Yeah, that's right.
Am I wrong about that?
Well, they came up with alternatives where we would be paying, but Congress is saying no. There is not going to be a repeal of NAFTA, and NATO is no longer obsolete. Those were three huge things that he talked about over and over again.
Okay,
and
so
now.
Right.
And
Grows
so,
in office. What can you say?
Right. I mean, so look, Donald Trump has never been sort of boxed in by consistency. We know that, right? We know that he's a non-ideological president. He's a president that, or a candidate, even as a candidate, even as a politician, someone that is willing to sort of change his positions. You can give him the benefit of the doubt and say, as Gary said, that he's growing in office. He's changing the size of the offices. Itself has, I think, altered his perception of what happens, particularly on global issues. I mean, you can look at NATO being probably the most obvious, NAFTA being secondly. I think the challenge for him, though, is to watch out for the sort of the political ADD. Brandon made a point here, which I think is exactly what the issue is. Tax reform is what he should have led with. It's what would have been successful for him. Stick to one thing. It's 100 days. He's been all over the map in 100 days. He would be far more effective if he says, look, we're going to reform taxes.
Then we'll move on.
And then we'll move on to the next thing. I think that the problem he has is that he operates by the news cycle, and he tries to dominate the news cycle. And so when there's an event that flares up, he has a policy prescription based on that, and then he moves on to the next one. And that's a hard way to govern consistently.
That's a good point.
I think it'd be hard to do, too, if it were the case that, like, he was losing his base. But polling suggests that 85% are still going to stick with him. And even Hillary Clinton's base isn't going to stick with her, hypothetically, should that match occur again.
He's still at the lowest approval rating of any president at this time in 100 days.
That's what we're talking about, too. But the fact that this kind of lurching between positions and the inconsistencies hasn't affected him among his base, I think is sort of a good sign for him, because he can not only dominate at every news cycle, but he can also use that as leverage to be able to communicate to this base, and that's something that most politicians can't do.
I wanted to ask you all about the medical care system. And Obama's reform of Medicare, Obamacare, it took more than 100 days. It was a complex process. We now know it's failing. So now the Republicans are trying to come up with an answer. The Democrats are saying, good luck. Why can't we get the parties together, the interest groups together, and sit down and talk about what is a medical plan or a healthy plan for America that makes sense?
Gosh, have you ever heard of a Freedom Caucus, Gary? Have you ever heard of a Freedom Caucus?
Reforming healthcare is probably one of the most complicated things you can possibly do.
That, right?
Exactly. I wouldn't. Yeah,
nobody knew that. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So the idea that you could do it from the get-go, I think, was always sort of fool's gold.
Day one.
Right. And the mistake that they made was sort of saying that and then not having a definitive plan in place. So part of the problem for Republicans, and I think this is a Republican Party plan, a problem less than a Donald Trump problem, You can't go 7 years saying repeal and replace, and not have something that's gone through a process and vetted and brought through.
And
signed off,
by
right?
people.
And they haven't. And every version they come up with seems to have problems. You've already got the American Hospital Association, American Medical Association has already come out against this new revised AHCA. So I think the problem for them is they've got to figure out from a philosophical perspective, how are they going to approach healthcare, put together something, and then go through a long, protracted process and do it. And I would say do it after.
And I would like to see Democrats who are open to get involved in the process, that are open to have ideas put in there and have them be considered. I'm troubled by the inability of give and take in politics, and I think it's been gone essentially since Bill Clinton's second term. That we don't have, Newt Gingrich and Newt got together and there was give and take, and Newt got some and Clinton got some, and the country actually was doing pretty good when we did that. And then Bush got elected, a little controversial, and it was the end.
I heard this
pitchforks on the other side. Obama, that was our turn. Now we got Trump. Now it's the Democrats' turn.
I heard this on the radio today coming in, and it was spoken by the chairperson of the Florida party, where Trump is going to be soon.
Yeah.
Well, he's always there. But she said, the Democrats just can't be the party of no. And I thought, it seems to me that worked for McConnell.
It's working.
It
Yeah,
worked for McConnell. And so I'm not opposed to saying no.
Well, at some point, the country's going to suffer. Yeah. I think that's clear.
The country's definitely suffering. The fact that we have the least productive Congress almost in history is testament to this. And the fact, if you can't get some kind of motion in these big policy issues, then people's lives are directly affected.
Right.
So, but it is that partisan brinksmanship is definitely creating an uncertainty, and that uncertainty is leading to economic stasis. We have, in this country, one of the biggest economies in the world, a week-to-week budget. There are people who
but we have
on minimum wage.
We also have one of the
working
we also have one of the more successful ones in the world. I mean, our growth rate is better than most of Western Europe.
Yeah.
Well, I think what makes people kind of confused about it is Trump effectively was elected for this sort of unified government, and the idea being that we could actually be productive and get things done. I think what's creating some of the uncertainty in the market, you see this now in the market starting to slow down, is that you have a Republican Congress entirely, you have a Republican executive branch entirely, and you still are dealing with week-to-week budgets. You're still dealing with sort of some of the strong substantive problems that occur, and you can't get things done. Part of the problem, I think, is that Trump himself is by nature sort of a much more polarizing figure. He's not that sort of Reagan, affable kind of character that can bring folks together. He governs from a sort of a minority position, and I think that's hard to make this thing work.
Well, it's only the first 100 days. He's learning on the job. Maybe he will do better. Maybe the Republicans in Congress will get used to having slim majorities and start achieving some legislative victories. But there's certainly a challenge there. I think people expect that. So
How will the Democrats ever sign on to a tax plan when he has not revealed his tax returns, knowing that part of his plan is to repeal an alternative minimum tax, repeal the estate tax, and lower the tax rates on people who have the wealth that he has? David, why would they vote for any tax plan when they don't know how it's going to benefit him?
On all the misinformation he puts out there, because the alternative minimum tax affects middle-class taxpayers. It affects you. It affects you. It affects him if he actually looks at his tax returns. That is not a fair tax. I mean, the idea that we get simpler, we eliminate a lot of deductions that we shouldn't have, so the government doesn't pick winners and losers, is actually a great idea. And it will help free the economy. Lowering business taxes will get more jobs to our people who need jobs. This is critical. And the Democrats need to pull their head out of wherever they've got it and quit opposing job creation, because that's what this is. Not government jobs, but real jobs in the private economy.
2/3 of corporations don't even pay any taxes, Gary.
Well, good. So we'll abolish them. We'll make it better.
I mean, it's, the effective tax rate for corporations
is your rate.
I think you just rambled.
No, I've got I want to talk about. I'm going to shift. I want to talk about the state, because we're about halfway through the show. State legislature is reaching the end point. It's been a fascinating session. Sanctuary cities is the big issue of the week. Yeah. Your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, two things. One, this was considered one of the emergency emergency issues that the governor put on the agenda. I think the first thing we ought to establish is there currently are no sanctuary cities or counties in Texas. That's not just our speculation. That's what the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, says. There aren't any. So the idea that it was always kind of something that was much more about politics than it was about the need or policy driven. That said, the bill itself, I think, is problematic really for one, and I think one very, very big reason is that it like the bill, Arizona's 1073 bill that was ruled unconstitutional, it presents a possibility for law enforcement officials to essentially kind of stop and ask for immigration status without an arrest, without a conviction. And it's created a huge political problem, I think, for Republicans, and has really, I think, united Latinos across the state.
So your preference on the bill would be is it should only happen if you've been arrested.
No. My preference on the bill, frankly, is that I think it was a fight that Republicans ought not to have done because it's not necessary. We talk a lot about wanting to have legislation for when there's a problem. When you identify an issue, you want to solve it. This was literally a bill where there was no actual problem, and I think that's part of the issue.
Well, right, especially whenever the head of Homeland Security says that we've got terrorists coming across the border, and that's our big national threat. Whenever there's no proof that there's ever been a terrorist that has been discovered that came across the Mexican border.
That's not
true. And what they're dealing with, and this is an immigration conversation as well. What they're dealing with, the Texas Lyceum poll, which says that most Texans or Americans believe that immigration is more helpful than harmful. The Cato Institute says there's far greater percentage of Americans incarcerated than there are illegals. So all of this scare talk about the dangerous Mexicans is just a bunch of lies.
Well, I think that where David misses the point is that most Americans support legal immigration, not illegal immigration. So the question with the bill, and where I disagree with you, is we have like the sheriff in Harris County, the police chief in Houston. They're saying people get arrested. We're not going to do any ICE detainers. Well, that's just wrong.
No, actually,
that's violating the law.
Yeah, I'm
they
not
do.
Sure
I mean, they do, and they have, and even the
in the
Travis
past,
County,
but now they said they're not gonna. I mean, the excuse for the sheriff is we don't have any money to do that, but he didn't ask for it to do it.
Right.
So I think that's unacceptable.
Well, he doesn't have any authority
honestly.
to put a detainer, an
ICE
ICE detainer on
has
him.
authority to ask for a detainer, and the sheriff accepts it or not, David. Our sheriff says no. I think he's wrong.
Well, part of that is I think that there's a frustration from local government that they're not getting their ability to have some oversight over what they do locally, and this is true for law enforcement and we're very pointed about the fact that we don't have the money and we don't have the resources to be able to do this.
That's a fair
and there are
comment.
other things
Ask
that are
for
important.
It.
Yeah,
for it.
well, and they did, in fact. Like some of the debate is centered around the sort of unfunded mandate from the state, which we know Republicans don't like in theory, but that now there's all this sort of new costs that local governments are going to have because of these things.
So we need a constitutional amendment prohibiting unfunded mandates.
Yeah, wouldn't that be good? Yeah. But you know what? Then the state would literally be underwater because they don't have enough money to fund all these other
That's right.
things,
Another issue.
This tells us, though, I think, more than just about the immigration issue or the moral issues around sanctuary cities, that the right wing of the Republican Party definitely is resurgent in this. And I want to hear your thoughts on this, too. But this is definitely something that we didn't see last session as much, and we saw a little bit with respect to guns and some on taxes. But this has been a session where between this and between the bathroom bill, there have been a real lurching to the right. And although Speaker Strauss is thought to be this kind of moderate leader, it doesn't end up looking like that at the end of the day on these kinds of issues.
Most of these issues have been, at least at the national level, have been stopped by courts, federal courts, even in a Pacific island.
And this one could too. And this one could too.
But the courts are changing.
Right.
That's the good news.
Well,
if you're a Republican.
there's an amendment that asks whether or not we should stall the implementation until the courts are going to hear it, because according to what was during the debate, we know it's going to end up in court, and so depending on the outcome of that, we can then implement the bill. It didn't pass, obviously, but that's part of that, I think, struggle is we're going to spend years debating this issue and, thousands and thousands of dollars on legal fees to have potentially it overturned.
Well, especially since, Gary, I don't know whether you remember this or not, but Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote an opinion that said that that the federal government could not coerce or command a state, local, jurisdiction to be an administrator of any federal program. That was during the Brady Bill debate.
Right, and Obama was a king of that, by the way. In terms of, they did even with bathrooms, they didn't even have any authority. That's where that all came from. Okay, next topic, Houston pension reform.
Right.
That's a big issue. We care about it a lot in Houston. Significant news of the week: the Arnold Foundation, which has done a very thorough study of the pension plans, they analyzed the pension plans across the country. They have debunked the myth that defined contribution for future hires is something will not end up saving the taxpayers' money long term. So where does that leave this whole debate?
So Josh McGee, who's the analyst for the Arnold Foundation, who did that study, also heads up the state's pension fund analysis. He did two things. One, he is in support of Mayor Turner's plan, but he does say that for new hires, that a defined contribution. And for the viewers, those are plans in which it's like a 401k type system.
Like most everybody has who works in the private sector these days.
That would be a easier or more preferred option for potential new hires. Now, I wouldn't go as far in reaching the conclusion that he's saying the defined contribution is the only way forward, but it's certainly, I think, one. But I don't think it was necessarily a negative for the mayor. I think if anything, he endorses the plan. He says the mayor's plan is a solid plan forward, but I think he thinks that for new hires, plus additional things need to happen. And so I think you can view it as a positive for the mayor, and then I think a path forward for even more compromise.
Yeah, so in other words, what it is he's saying, yeah, I like the plan, but we need to add this element to it.
Right.
Which is the same thing that's happening in Austin. So, Brandon, is it your take? We're going to end up with the mayor's plan plus the defined contribution for future hires?
It seems to me like there's not much choice, right? I mean, the mayor really has to make something happen, and if he doesn't, as he said, that's the apocryphal collapse of the city budget. So,
do you think the mayor has to feel like somehow he was defeated if he has to accept defined contribution for future hires?
My sense is politically, if the mayor can get something on the table and move in that direction, that he probably would be fine. I mean, I know that there's friction, and there was in the mayor's election, about whether or not this is the right way to go. But I think at the end of the day, something has got to move, and if he's can claim credit for half a loaf, that's pretty good.
It's kind of like our prescription for Washington.
There you go. Yeah, take half. It's not bad.
Listen, there's one thing we forgot to bring up, and it's kind of critical, I think, and that is that the paperwork that is being held by the White House that identifies what it is that Michael Lockerup Flynn, former general, said, and what he was paid to do by the Russians, is being stonewalled by the White House. I'm wondering whether or not there's the key to impeachment inside the Flynn papers.
Oh, David, you're whistling past the graveyard.
If you dig enough, you're going to find something wrong. I don't know what it is exactly, but all presidents deal with scandals. It typically tends to reduce the amount of output that they're able to produce. So perhaps the 100 days has been affected by the inability to the inability to get past the scandal as a result. So there are definitely some implications in terms of governing. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's there, but the investigation in theory would bring this out.
Comey certainly has a reputation to be improved after what he did in the election. So I would think that if there's a chance to put somebody in jail in this, that Comey is going to make sure that happens.
David, that makes as much sense as the Republicans saying we were going to impeach Barack Obama. Stupid.
Well, too early of a strike at impeachment.
Yeah, and remember,
he
fired Flynn. Okay, he didn't keep him around. He was terminated.
I mean, I think the entire sort of
it's nothing.
So all of the smoke around the issues surrounding Russia, and what kind of involvement they had is going to kind of, I think, permeate the air until it gets cleared out. Now, whether or not it rises to the level of something that's going to result in impeachment proceedings, I think it's a little premature to talk about.
Well, House. Democrats need the House in 2018 anyway.
Impeachment.
Yeah, but we know that it's going to be continued to talk about because that's the nature of politics.
Maybe you have something else that you guys. David will come up in his dreams at night, but there's no impeachment of Trump coming. And the guy's been tough with Russia. So this whole idea that if Russia wanted a weak, ineffectual president that they could push around, well, they just want Obama's successor. That would have been Hillary Clinton, because Obama got shoved around by Putin like he was just a little boy.
Well, I will say this. From the Democrats' perspective, they probably want to keep Trump around. I mean, his poll numbers are dragging. He's had a hard time with independence.
He can't get anything passed.
And he's probably the one person who's unified the Democratic Party.
That I would agree with, that the party's unified, but the problem is they still got the same problems they had this cycle of what they stand for, and they're into identity politics. And it depends on where you end up in the food chain of who's the most critical identity group at the time.
If his numbers continue to be this low in 18, like David said, they're on pace to lose 35, 40 seats, and that is a sea change in the House and maybe pick up a couple in the Senate. I don't know if the Senate's going to be
the election
flippable,
is not for, 18 months?
He's got time, you think, right?
Yes, but they have time to get things done.
Oh, there's no doubt. And
he gets the economy moving. He gets people back to work. Republicans will hold the House and Senate, and Trump popularity will be up.
He's got a huge challenge.
That's true, but the polling still suggests that people see him as a strong leader.
Time is up. Thank you, Brandon Ridinghouse. Thank you, J.R., the professors who know a lot, I think.
Thank you, gentlemen. Be sure to check out Jay and Brandon in our new political podcast, Party Politics. You can download it at houstonpublicmedia.org/party or anywhere podcasts are available. Oh, and we want to hear what you have to say about the issues that affect Houston. Submit your comments on Facebook and on Twitter at RWB_8. We'll see you again next week. Have a great evening.